Okay, comrades, thanks for coming tonight. Tonight's meeting is of the Uncaptive Minds Communist Discussion Series titled Where is the Labour Party Going? Before you swear with the answer, I'd like to introduce the speakers. The first speaker is David Bailey from Birmingham University, and the next speaker is going to be Andrew Fisher, who's National Secretary of the Labour Representation Committee, and the final speaker is myself from the Commune. So I'm going to kick off. David.
Thank you. Okay, so I should probably say I'm speaking in personal capacity here, but not that makes much difference. So, as we enter the beginning of what looks like it will be a long general election campaign, the various elements of Britain's political elite are lining up to convince the various sections of that electorate that it wishes to speak to that they really are the best choice for them. So, in heralding the government's Queen's speech last week, this is from the Labour Party's website, where they announced Britain faces a choice between a Labour government with an optimistic view of the future of the country, believing that government can be a force for good in securing prosperity, caring for the vulnerable and building public services for everyone, whereas the Conservatives' approach is to abandon the responsibility of government, to let the recession take its course, and to leave people to sink or swim. But of course, we'd expect the Labour Party to say that. But it's also an argument that you can see amongst those more critical on the left. So as I saw the Labour Representation Committee were speaking, I was looking through their website. I saw one of the articles they've got there from Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Representation Committee, an article they published in the Morning Star in September warning of David Cameron's message of tough cuts and Cameron's plans under which the better off would be encouraged into subsidised private provision and the rest would be forced to try and survive with a diminishing choice of last resort public services. So instead, Corbyn and the Labour Representation Committee apparently argue for the Labour Party to move away from its new Labour anti-welfare, anti-working class and surveillance society politics, and that the Labour Party should instead adopt a more redistributive set of policies and should use public ownership to avoid job losses. And there's a third argument we've been hearing, I think, with increased frequency over the previous few years, and that's that what we need is a new Workers' Party. A new Workers' Party to replace the currently unrepresentative selection of options open to those voters who seek a fairer capitalist society, in which workers would have a greater input into the organisation of that society, to receive better welfare services and social security, and to be free from the fear of unemployment and poverty. So the argument that I'd like to make is basically that all of these views are wrong. First, they're wrong because they're based on the view that somehow political parties have the autonomy to introduce whatever policies they would like to see implemented, as if there were no constraints emerging from the shape of the international economy, no constraints in terms of the opposition that party policy faces from business leaders, trade unions, workers, activists and consumers. And instead, I'd argue any party policy will always have to be workable in the context within which it's located. And that context is currently so constraining that a change in either government or parliamentary personnel will not lead to a change in the types of policies that are implementable. Real social change will only come about when we have a real change in the relationships that make up society. It's only then that the constraints preventing the creation of a more equal society can be overcome. And unfortunately, the quick fix associated with a change in personnel, either the personnel running the government, or the personnel running the Labour Party, or the personnel sitting in the Parliament and standing for elections, doesn't represent any real change in the social relationships within which we are located. Indeed, I'd argue in perpetuating the myth that voting for a political party can bring about real social change, this view can only help to reinforce the current system. A system in which opposition, rebellion and resistance is only viewed as legitimate when it goes through or is approved of by a parliamentary chamber of overprivileged and out-of-touch members of the self-serving political elite. And for similar reasons, any argument for a new Workers' Party should be considered a class struggle cul-de-sac that needs at this point to be avoided by any resurgent workers' movement at all costs. Electoralism led to failure and quiescence for the working class when it was tried the first time around, and I can think of no reason why it wouldn't be the same again. In fact, this time it would probably be even less successful due to the already existing Labour Party and the need that creates to wrestle voters away from the Labour Party that workers are already, a significant section of workers and the electorate already have some kind of psychological association with. So in other words, you'd have to you'd be faced with a huge uphill struggle to take a significant section of the working class electorate away, and I think that's even less plausible now than it was when the first Labour Representation Committee started it in 1900. So I'd also argue that these views about the advantages of old Labour, new Labour or a new Workers' Party are wrong for a second reason, and that's in their analysis of the Labour Party, what it is and what role it plays in contemporary society, why the move towards new Labour occurred in the first place, and whether we might see a return to the old Labour politics of redistribution, attempt to be pro-welfare and employ policies such as nationalisation as a means for tackling unemployment. So what I'm basically arguing is there's simply no reason to believe that the Labour Party could, nor would want to, move back towards the days of redistribution, welfarism, pro-trade unions that we come to associate with the idea of old Labour. The argument that I'd make, therefore, is that there's really no value in supporting and working for the re-election of Labour or for the creation of a new Workers' Party. There's no reason to expect that a re-elected new Labour government would be a more desirable outcome than a newly elected Conservative one. There's no reason to expect that the Labour Party can or will be reformed so that it will be better than the currently noxious new Labour regime. Just to note that if we note that Peter Mandelson was beyond anger with striking postal workers, that's just yet another example, if we need one, that New Labour has gone beyond despisal for workers, but this is not because the wrong personnel or policies are in place within the Labour Party, which I think is sort of the argument of the Labour Representation Committee, but rather because the relationships that make up contemporary society ensure that any Workers' Party, a new Workers' Party, an old Labour Party or the new Labour Party will ultimately work to the detriment of workers' resistance and rebellion by channeling it into a safe system of representation and reinforcing the ideas that class struggle can go on at the level of parliamentary representation rather than on the ground in the workplace and in our local communities. So, in order to make this argument, what I want to do is highlight the way in which I think the Labour Party is best conceptualised, focusing especially on the role that it plays in society and the reasons it acts in the way that it does. This will hopefully help us to understand the course that New Labour has taken over recent years, to consider the direction we might expect the Labour Party to take in the years to come, and also to consider what we might expect from any new Workers' Party that might arise in the meantime. Now, in seeking to understand where the Labour Party is going, therefore, we need to be able to conceptualise what the Labour Party is. And in a couple of publications that I've put out in the last couple of years, I've argued that social democratic parties in general, not just the Labour Party, but social democratic parties across particularly Western Europe, should be conceptualised as a set of social relationships. This can hopefully inform our discussion of the Labour Party. And two sets of relationships I argue of particular importance. The first is the relationship between the party elite and the party constituency. And that constituency considered both amongst the grassroots membership of the Labour Party and in the wider electorate. And this relationship needs to be understood historically. As we of course know, it is a relationship that emerged out of the Industrial Revolution and out of the mass trade unionism that was born in the course of the 19th century. The Labour Party was formed by the trade union movement alongside early socialist parties and societies, which increasingly came to the view that there needed to be representation of the labour movement within Parliament in order to provide some balance to the sets of laws and policies that would otherwise be consistently biased in favour of the bourgeoisie. As social democratic parties were formed through the labour movement in each country, so they found that in order to be viable electoral parties, they also needed to offer a viable policy programme that would benefit their predominantly working class constituency. So they needed to have a set, if they're going to become an electable party, they need to have a set of policies which appears to benefit the workers who vote for them.